Hello, friends. Just before we get into the podcast, I just wanted to tell you guys about the Scopies that we just announced just a couple days ago. If you're newer around here and you didn't see the Scopies last year, it's our annual hardcore award show and celebration. We look back at the year of hardcore and we have nominated a ton of people for EP of the year, Demo of the year, Split of the year, LP of the year, and a number of other categories, just to give roses and props to all the people that have made hardcore super sick in 2022. Voting is now open and you can find the form to vote in the description of this podcast as well as our link tree, which is in our Instagram bio. We're going to be posting about it a ton on social media in the next few days. Voting will be closed on December 30th, and then all the winners will be announced on a special Scoped Exposure podcast episode debuting on the 31st. So if you've already made your top 10 hardcore list, take that information, apply it to the Scopies form, again, in the description of this video or in our link tree. And, we almost had 700 people fill out the form last year. I would love to see 1,000, and I think we're almost a quarter of the way there, even within the first 24 hours of the voting being live. So without any further ado, let's get into the podcast and go cast your vote for the Scopies. See ya.
I was like in my first week of college and I was like talking to my professors like, hey, if I leave for a month, is that cool? And they were like, no, you can't do that. Like, that's not at all.
Absolutely not. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. This is another episode of the Scoped Exposure podcast. I'm very excited for this interview, this conversation, today's guest. As anyone, if you've been living under a rock, obviously a lot of hardcore things that are happening in the Bay right now and in the last year or so have been really popping. A lot of bands coming up and really killing the game and touring a lot. And a band specifically that I saw that really started to get a lot of, had a debut in the midst of all things COVID, but has really just like taken that momentum of maybe more people listening to their music and just like going off and playing all over, and also playing in that realm of that more grittier punk style. Is Spy. And I got to see Spy at Act Like You Know Fest in Oklahoma, and Peter and I got to chat. I think it was the day after they played. It was the last day of the fest, and he was down and gracious enough to come on the podcast. So without further ado, I'm very excited to be welcoming Peter of Spy and World Peace on the podcast. Thanks for coming on, my friend.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate you.
Absolutely. First off, before getting into anything, your mustache game is like 10 out of 10. I have to say that.
It's too thin, I think. It doesn't quite grow in as much as I like. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I think I'm saying that because I have been rocking the mustache a little bit, but I've let this grow out a little bit more. So, now it's just becoming one beard. So it's reminding me that I should probably do a little bit more self-care and join you in the mustache game. I kind of feel I'm not gonna shave mid interview. I feel like that would be a little strange.
You should. I think that would be good.
Yeah, maybe we'll get a wild enough into an episode where I pull out the clippers or whatever. But yeah, Peter, I'm really excited to chat. Like I said in the intro, like the debut of seeing you guys was well warranted, and I think everything met my expectations of what a Spy set should be as far as the hectic craziness of it. And I think even listening to your discography this morning, a lot of the the first two EPs like just totally match the energy of what you guys bring to the live table. So I'm really excited to talk about all things Spy. But before we get into that, obviously we have to check some bevs before we get into the episode. So it's a tradition for the guests to go first. and it's early in the morning here, so I'm curious what you're going to be bringing to the show today.
So I got some black coffee here in my Convulse Records mug. Shout out Convulse Records from Denver, Colorado.
Yeah, very
Um,
sick record label and very sick mug. I'm very ironically also drinking black coffee out of a Karma coffee mug. So let me see if I
that's
can do
the
this.
that's
Yeah.
a great mug.
Yeah, it's
Shout out
I'm
Karma for the
hoping
mug.
more hardcore bands do coffee mugs in the future, because I feel like that's an under it's a part of merchandising that I don't see as much from bands.
It's an untapped market. We gotta start making mugs.
Yeah. Yeah. What would the spy mug be like? I guess maybe it would just be a white mug with like all your guys' artwork just wrapped around it. I think that'd
I'll,
be
I'll
pretty dope.
I'll show you. I don't know if it'll
Oh, you
show.
have one already rocked up?
I just thought of it. I was gonna use this as a sticker, but can you see that?
Yo, put that on a mug, bro.
Yeah, maybe that'll be a mug.
I'll buy a set. That's very cool. Yeah, no, yeah, Convulse Records, shout out to them. I've seen a lot of dope bands, especially in the last couple of years, going off of that. Beans wise, when it comes to coffee, do you have any preferences there, or do you just kind of grab whatever has the most kick?
um, I work at a warehouse that does all the production for coffee beans and bagging and shipping and everything. So I just grab whatever from there.
Got
Uh,
you.
but it's like a third wave coffee. It's all kind of the same in the sense that it's usually pretty tasty and
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty good. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No.
I think I prefer like the Ethiopian coffees usually, but
Mhm.
yeah, and I think that's what I have right now.
Yeah, that's usually top of the list for me as well. I can't remember. I know the coffee that I brewed just before the podcast here is a Calgary company, but I'm not sure where those beans are sourced. So, but anything third wave is always the standard that I try to keep to as well. Because
It
nothing is
usually
worse than
tastes
trying.
better at least.
Yeah, nothing is like there are times where I have to sink to the level of corporate coffee because either I've run out of beans or, desperate times call for desperate measures. But, nothing beats being able to brew some dope coffee that doesn't taste like just ash water at the end of the day.
Yeah, I'll admit to drinking Starbucks on tour like almost every day. So sometimes there's no way around it.
Yeah. Are
If you're
you
driving in the middle of nowhere and there's no coffee, it's gonna have to be
right?
either that or the gas station.
Well, what's interesting is that when people come on the podcast and we talk about coffee and local spots, always come up. There needs to almost be like a master list of like all the dope third wave and just local spots and just like it's like a PDF that you can download if you're going on a full US and you'd be like,
I,
"Oh,
I
we're
think
in."
I think you're right because I always see people on Twitter saying like, "Hey, what's the good coffee in St. Louis or whatever,
Right.
wherever the fuck." So I think you're right. It's got to happen.
Yeah, Jordan, if you want to just jot that down as far as a potential scoped exposure idea, that just all dope coffee that you need to check out if you're touring Canada or the US. But Peter, cheers to you, man. Already off to a great convo, so I'm really excited
Hey,
for this one.
thanks. Oh, if we're doing coffee in Canada, right before we end that segment, shout out Modus Coffee in Vancouver.
Modest?
Modus. They're
Oh,
hella
okay.
small and like, but I used to live in Vancouver and I would go in when they first opened and I became friends with the owner and he's sick. So
Well, it's very funny that you're plugging them because literally, like, just before we jumped on, and this was announced a couple days ago, but I just posted it on the Scoped account like today, like 5 minutes ago. But we're covering a Montreal festival called, is it Madhouse Montreal? We just want to make sure I
I
got
think I
that.
just saw the flyer for that.
Yeah, or Montreal Madhouse. So it's like an all like it's almost like an all Montreal hardcore showcase with tons of bands from that area. So that's going to be happening February 17th and 18th of 2023, and that is on my list of coffee spots to check out while I'm there, because that's a must. So you're helping me curate this mastermind list. So
Sorry about the cat.
no, that's I have two dogs right here, so that's to be expected. So before we get into the intro side of things, because you brought up living in Montreal, like that's something I didn't know. So
It was Vancouver.
oh, Vancouver.
But Montreal's cool too. No diss to Montreal.
Oh, okay. So sorry, is the coffee
I just
spot in
haven't lived there.
Montreal or is it in Vancouver?
So I lived in Vancouver, and that spot I was talking about is in Vancouver.
Oh, okay.
Right, next time you're in Vancouver.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I think I either misheard you or something like that. But yeah, Vancouver
There's either I feel like in Canada, there's like the three heavy hitters: the Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal. So I feel like it's easy to kind of lump them all in.
right.
Not that Calgary isn't a heavy hitter either.
Yeah, we can swing. We can swing with the best of them.
But I feel like those are the three cities people always talk about when they talk about Canadian cities.
Right.
So I don't know. I feel like it's easy to get them all mixed up.
Jordan, did I mishear Peter, or did Peter say Montreal and I'm just?
Oh no, you misheard.
I misheard?
Yeah.
Okay.
You started talking and I was like, he never said Montreal.
Well, you can mark that. I can maybe look at editing that out, because
No, I'll keep it in there.
It's just funny because Jordan,
you gotta humanize this, make
that's
it
true.
fluid.
That's true. Yeah. Jordan we have a shared doc while we're doing these episodes, and he just writes Spencer needs more coffee ... And it's like, that is true. And I also have Montreal on the brain. But anyways, Peter, let's talk about your origin when it comes to heavy music, punk music, hardcore music. Take me way back in time to like the first time that you were first hearing about this stuff, the early bands that kind of like put this side of music onto your radar, and we'll kind of get started there.
Yeah, so I think the true origin would be while I was in elementary school. It was like the new metal movement was really big. So I feel like I would see Korn and Slipknot and System of a Down and Linkin Park and like Limp Bizkit or something like that. Like all those bands were like huge. So I would see that. I don't know. It just, usually when you're that age, I feel like unless somebody older shows you something, you're just kind of, what's the right word? I don't know. You osmosis that shit. It just kind of enters your sphere and you absorb it.
Mm-hmm.
Like the mainstream stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
So that was really popular at the time. So it was easy and accessible. I think I would just like go on the internet, like Yahoo music videos or something. It's like 2001 or something. And like, I would like look up all those bands because I was like drawn to the sound.
Sure.
For some reason.
Yeah.
Which the reason's unexplainable. I don't know why, but I was like drawn to all those bands.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then I would like ask my parents for the CDs or something, and they would be like, "What? I don't know. It says explicit lyrics or whatever." I'm like, come on. I don't know.
You're handing them the CD at the store with like covering it up with your thumb.
Yeah, exactly. And they were like really wary of everything because they were like they're immigrants from Poland, so they're like, I don't know. Their experience in America was new as well, so it was like I feel we were all learning at the same time.
Right.
But they were pretty cautious about like the stuff that they let me engage with, I guess.
Sure.
So, but yeah, somehow I managed to get all that stuff, all those CDs, whatever, or I would just watch the music videos.
Sure.
So that's like the initial exposure, and then I guess fast forward to like a few years later, being like 13 years old, and all that stuff's kind of like in the background still. Like I am, if I play like a video game, I hear like a heavy song. I'm like, yeah, I like that one. Like I'm
Right.
playing Tony Hawk or something. I hear like a Mastodon song. I'm like, wow, that's really cool.
Right.
But anyways, but then it didn't really like truly begin to like take over my life until I was around 13. Um, and that's when like all the MySpace stuff was popular, all the Warped Tour stuff was popular. So again, it was like kind of in the mainstream, which made it more accessible to me, which made it easier to like use that as a launching point to get into all this kind of shit.
Hmm.
And then from there, and just discovering more and more and more and more bands and reading about the history of all this stuff, and then eventually, within a few months, I'm like okay, like so, what are like the important original bands? Like what's punk, metal, hardcore? What's all that? Like what's going on in the '80s? So at that point, I'm like discovering all the '80s stuff. And then from there, it's been a long, long time, and I'm still into it. So I
Yeah.
guess it clicked.
Yeah, but I do like you framing up in the way like before this took over my life because there's
Yeah,
like
there's
I'm
a,
really
there's a distinct line, like
absolutely,
I
absolutely.
remember exactly when it happened. It was like January 2007. After that, it was over.
Yeah, it is like it is so interesting to like frame it up that way because I think a lot of people listening to this podcast, like myself included, like can be like, yeah, like hardcore or just because hardcore is like a music genre, but it's just like the culture, the mindset, like all of that. It's all encompassing, in my opinion. And I feel like it does get to a point where it's like there's a no going back kind of mantra. Like there's never a point in my life where I don't think I'm going to be having 50% of my closet be band shirts, to be having like breakdowns and punk beats in my Spotify Wrapped if it's 2050 or whatever it is. Like I think it is just like once it's it's partially like a thing where it find like you find it, but it's also it finding you at the same time because when I was first like a lot of the early stuff that you were mentioning, like the new metal, like the peak of new metal stuff, the finding music videos that are all related to one another, hearing something on a video game, a lot of that is very similar to my exposure as well. But yeah, there's like two there is a line, as you said, where it gets to a point where it's like, yeah, after X there was no going back.
Yeah, and honestly, there were periods of time where I thought I was like losing interest, but not really. It just kind of shifted and took different shapes, and then it always like kind of cycles back um, to heavy music
Right.
in one form or another. Like doesn't really matter.
Yeah. To jump kind of back to you were talking about your parents, and it was seems like they were like very traditional. So when you're showing them like the people equal shit music video, they're like, "Whoa, that's a little crazy." But
Yeah.
like, does any of your family have any like musical background or like interest there, or were you kind of like the patient zero when it came to being poisoned by punk music, if that makes sense, or did they have any kind of like um musical background there?
No, I think I'm the patient zero. I think because my entire family is all of them live in Poland. They're all from Poland. I'm like the oldest sibling, I guess. Like I have an older half sister, but I've never lived with her. I've never spent that much time around her.
Right.
She's like 9 years older than me, so it's not like she was influencing me or anything. Living overseas and not hanging out with her at all. So I was like the oldest sibling, oldest cousin. All my cousins are younger than me. They're all just like getting to be um, like young adults now. So like I have a cousin who's 19 and he came to America for the first time over the summer and I took him to Sound and Fury and now he's
Oh.
like now he's super into all this shit, which is
Wow.
cool. Um but yeah, it's definitely I was definitely the one that like uh in my family at least that like was the first to be into all this. I have
Right.
a younger brother too, and he's 21 now, so he's like he listens to heavy music and stuff. But I tried when he was really young, and he didn't really care. But now he likes it a little bit
Right.
more. He'll go to shows. But yeah, so I in my family definitely just there's no real like background or anything with music.
Right.
Like my dad liked music, my mom liked music. Um, all my family members probably like and listen to music, but like it's not like something that was dominant in their lives or like they didn't play instruments or
Sure.
whatever. It wasn't really emphasized. I think I took piano lessons when I was like 5 for a month and I didn't like it and then I stopped. That
Right.
was the extent of like the family forced music experience. Um, but also when I was a little kid, my dad did play some like cool records that might have like entered my brain
Mm-hmm.
somehow. I remember him playing like some really weird Frank Zappa shit when I was a kid that I remember actually hating and like turning off. I was like 4 or 5, and I was like, I hate it. I like went to the
You're like
stereo.
pressing the button. Yeah,
And they're like, "What are you doing? Like, why are you doing that?"
yeah.
But yeah, so I don't know. I think overall there's no like nobody like influenced me or anything.
Mm-hmm.
I had to figure it out on my own, being like
Yeah.
first the firstborn son of new immigrants to America or whatever, all that
Right.
shit.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think the reason I ask is I think there's been lots of people who have come on the podcast that are like, they do have family members that like, were just like metalheads. They listen to hair metal and Pantera and Metallica and all that stuff, and that's their experience. But I don't feel like there's um what I try to emphasize, at least on the podcast, is there's no right way to get into this shit, or like you're just having your life experience, and then at some point, hardcore might be entering the picture, and it's how those things kind of meld together, and then that's your own unique story. Because very much for me, it was the same way where, my dad was like kind of into music, like my mom like sang in church, like she did a lot of that kind of stuff, but like heavy music wise, like maybe the heaviest thing that like my dad would maybe be listening to was like, you know, like, you know, like Van Halen on like on the odd day when it's like the weekend and he wants to like let loose or whatever. But the aspect of like playing in bands like was like I'm kind of patient zero for that. And I think a lot of my family has, they kind of look from the outside and they're like, that's like it's you seem to be like bringing like a part of something when you're going to these shows. So I don't know if your folks or any of your family back in Poland have shot you messages, seeing videos of Spy, or I don't know if you try to keep that under a bunker, for no one to see.
yeah, I don't really know. I don't really talk about it with anybody except for like the younger people, the cousins and stuff,
Right.
um, because everyone else would be like in their 50s, 60s, and beyond. And I don't know if they really get it at that age.
Right.
Um, Not that you can't get it at that age, but I don't know. I feel like it's easier if you're younger to
Yeah.
kind of wrap your head
Once you're
around
getting
this.
to that age, you're like, I've seen enough shit. I don't need to learn what fucking
Yeah,
blast
and
beats are.
if you're like that age and you grew up with this shit and you still love it, that makes sense. But like if you never heard of it, it's like brand new to you, and you're like, what the fuck is this? Like, what are these kids doing? Like,
Right. Why are they all fighting all the time? And just yeah,
exactly.
yeah, exactly.
Looks weird to people with from the outside perspective. I can like totally wrap my head around that.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the main project that you're in, which is Spy. I was listening to another interview that you did, and a quote that really stood out to me that I want to kind of like set up for kind of talking about the origin of that band is Spy started because of the prominence of what was happening in the local scene at the time. So can you talk to me about like the why behind starting that band and kind of what was going through your head in the midst of like, feeling to start that project. And then we'll kind of get into, the first release and the timing of it being kind of unique and go from there.
Yeah. So where to begin? So I grew up in the Bay Area for the most part, but I was living in Vancouver in Canada from 2016 to 2019, going to school.
What were you going to school for up here?
Sociology.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have some background in that, but yeah, so I was going to school in Vancouver, but I was always like visiting home and had like a finger on the pulse, so to speak, of what was going on at home. And then I remember like bands from the Bay coming up. I think it might have even been 2019, like Drain and No Right, I think, and Hands of God maybe played this little hardcore fest in Vancouver.
What year was that?
I think it was 2019. I don't remember the name.
Was it the DBK 5-year?
Yeah, it was. It was that. Yeah.
You were there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like Scope.
Anyways, I was like seeing like, oh, like Bay bands are being noticed and like people are bringing them up here for this, and like that's cool. Like the Bay's doing great. But anyway, so I finished school. I moved back to the Bay.
Right.
I went to some local shows in the Bay. I was like, wow, this is really popping off right now. This is sick. And my whole plan was to like, I did everything backwards basically. I went to school and then I was like, now I'm gonna start a band. Right. And start doing all that shit. I feel like usually people are younger and they're like, fuck school, I'm gonna start a band, whatever. But I went to school for like 7 years, and then after that I was like, all right, now it's time to play some music. But I had this idea in my mind, like, okay, in the last few years of my 20s, I might as well do the thing I actually want to do, which is play music. So I moved back and I joined my friends in World Peace. And then I did like a 6-week tour with them. This is all 2019.
Right. And you were playing bass in World Peace, right?
Yeah. But yeah, I basically had this plan, like, all right, I'm going to devote the next few years of my life to just doing music while I'm still relatively youthful. And so I did that tour with World Peace. It was really long and grueling. And then after that, I was like, all right, that was awesome, but time to start another band. So I have a few different things going on.
Were you in a place where you were like, I wanted to be the vocalist? And that's kind of what prompted it?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, because that's always been my favorite part to play in a band.
Right.
And honestly, that's what I'm best at. I'm not like a great musician. I'm passable. I can play power chords. I can play single notes on bass. You know what I mean? Like, but
I'm not a top string bass player.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not a superstar instrumentalist or anything. So, but anyway, whatever. Anyways, I had the idea in mind that I wanted to start a hardcore band and do vocals, and so I wrote those 4 tracks for the 4 tracks that became the first Spy release. I wrote those in December 2019, and they were just like voice memos on my phone. And at that point I was like, I'm gonna start hitting up some friends and see if we can get this going. And I think we had our first band practice or whatever, like January or February 2020.
Okay.
And yeah, we did we met up a few times, and then we set a recording date, and then the whole world came to a halt. But we still had the recording date, so I still went in and recorded the tracks with just the drummer Cole, who from Scowl, I think.
Yeah,
he was the original drummer. So yeah, it was just me and him. We went into the studio and recorded those 4 tracks, and I did all the stuff that wasn't drums. He did the drums, and then it was done. And then after that, it got released in July, and that's kind of where the band really starts, I guess.
Right. So yeah, there's a few things that I think we can break down. Just like I think it's, well, first off, I think it's cool that we were both at a fest, and
Oh yeah.
didn't know each other. So yeah, I think, and it was cool that you were a California person that was up for school, but then got to go to a fest and be like, wow, like there's so many bands from back home that are just like killing it, like
Yeah.
um that fest specifically was super interesting because like seeing no right, that was the first time seeing no right, and then that kind of prompted me to reach out to Sierra to ask if no right would want to be a headliner for the Scope 2-year anniversary that same year. So there's that first time seeing Drain as well, and like seeing a band play for 12 minutes and just absolutely rock faces, and then just fast forward just a few years later and just go and take over the world. So there's also that. And then also seeing a band like Hands of God that's come up through Western Canada a couple times. And, I'm not sure of the current state of that band, but seeing them just absolutely demolish as well. Like so many just California bands that's just actually just really showed up for that fest specifically. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second is the aspect of like, putting everything together and having the recording day, and obviously like things being like, I don't know, but it's like, well, what else are we gonna do as far as, like those first couple of months of everything? So at what point was the actual first EP like fully recorded, and you have like, you know, you have the masters in a Dropbox folder? Like roughly what date is that?
I know we recorded in one day in early April 2020, and I think it was done pretty soon after that because yeah, it's just Charles Toshio who plays in No Right. He also records a million bands out here.
Right.
He did it, and I'm pretty sure he didn't have much else to worry about in terms of mixing and mastering at the moment because
Right.
nobody was going in the studio. Um, so yeah, it was done pretty quick. I was probably done in April 2020, and then I think I sent it to a few people like, "Hey, you want to put this out? What do you think?" Blah blah blah. And didn't really get anything from anybody. So I got just to live a lie who put out our stuff. I got him to agree to do 100 tapes, and then yeah. So but everything was like delayed. So those tapes didn't come out until maybe a month or two after the thing was released online. It
Right.
was released I think July 8th, 2020, and then
Yeah. Well, a
tapes.
month after is not, in the grand scheme of things, is not too much of a delay,
No,
when
it's
some
not. But it
records
felt
is
like
like
a
9
wait at the
months.
time. It
Yeah,
felt
it
like
felt like forever at the time. Yeah, yeah.
because the very beginning of like launching a new band, everything feels like extra. Uh, like I don't know. I just wanted it to all be like cohesive and have tapes ready and everything.
Right. So in that kind of note, like obviously there was a lot of people that had records pretty much ready to go for 2020, and then pumped the brakes
Mhm.
just because of the unknown. But I think 2020 was clearly a year where a lot of people, well, there was two things that happened. A lot of people that had records that maybe were on the shelf started side projects that inarguably like almost became bigger than their actual bands. And then the other side of the coin is just people starting brand new bands, and a lot more people were just at home and had a little bit, they had nothing better to do, so they were like, I need to go out and listen to new music. So talk to me about like what's going through your mind where you're like you said, you went to school for like 7 years, and now you're doing the band thing, and it's like maybe in that first month or so you're like, this is literally the worst timing to be putting out like my debut thing. But like
Yeah.
hindsight, it might have been helpful because more people are checking things out. So I'm just kind of curious, like what was going through your head at the time, and how have you either made peace with it, or what's been your hindsight, being here right now.
Yeah, so I think in the moment you're exactly right. I was like, "Oh fuck, like this sucks. Like this is terrible timing. Like nobody's gonna, I don't know, like nobody. Oh, we can't play shows. Nobody's gonna care. Like blah blah blah." that whole mindset, I guess. I was really worried about shows, like, oh, you can't play shows, then like, what's the point, right? Um, but in retrospect, no, it was like we were completely huge benefactors from COVID. Like people had there's like a void where established bands don't want to put music out because you can't tour on it and it seemed pointless. Um, and people were at home, more people were at home and had more time to check something out than they otherwise would have. I feel like if we had put it out, if COVID never happened, or we had put it out before, um, then it would have gotten, maybe a few people would have checked it out, but I don't think it would have gotten anywhere near as much of a chance. I guess I think people were much more willing to give something new a chance at that time period.
Right.
And we also benefited because we didn't, there was no shows, so like we just got to have it grow on the internet to the point where like the first time we played a show, people already cared. So I had to like experience a period of time where like, oh, it's our first show, like we just put this out, nobody's heard it, nobody cares. That whole thing was skipped with this band.
Right.
Which feels really strange, but yeah, just from the get-go of shows happening for this band, about like a year or so later down the line, it was like already like established in minds, so they were already interested, already down, already knew the words or whatever, like it was like immediately people were down with the live performance in a way that wouldn't have happened if we had hadn't had that COVID period with no shows.
Right. And I feel like, it's not to say like the minute that shut down, everyone is in that like, oh, time to listen to new music, because it was such a unprecedented time where like I think there was bands who were dropping new music that week just because it's like fucking queued for Spotify or whatever. And I feel like those releases really unfortunately suffered because, like Pummel is a band that comes to mind where they had an EP that came out the week of shutdown, and I felt like that release is so good, but just got so just kind of left in such a weird time frame.
Yeah.
It was almost like the equivalent of like, I don't know, putting something out on like January 6th or something like that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I
It's
feel
like, oh, we can't really celebrate this day because now this day has this time on the calendar has a new meaning. But
Mhm.
I think July was right at that time where people globally were realizing that this wasn't going away in a couple weeks or a month, and it's kind of time to like strap down and you know uh, change some behaviors, because I would try to be pretty avid of like looking at new music, but I think most people can. I feel like it's fair to say that most people are like, they're just too busy in their day-to-days where they might see something but they don't really think about, okay, I'm going to sit down and listen to this release. So I think right around the July time where the first EP came out was right at the time where people kind of were like, okay, this is how it is, and then the rest is history.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. Much how it played out.
Yeah. So I think something else within the sphere of spy that is very connected, and I think also caught a lot of people attention wise, is your guys' artwork direction, and that's stayed consistent through everything that you guys have put out. It's always just like very similar to the design that you showed that hopefully will be going on a mug sitting on this desk one day. But talk to me about the thought process there of, was it like since day one you're like, I want all our releases to almost feel like a collection of like things that are clearly connected to one another, or was just the artist just one of your favorites that you just wanted to continually work with?
I would say the initial thought process, I didn't even think about more than just the first release. the fact that it's sort of a continuation is just a product of like, okay, yeah, that there's enough interest to like keep doing this, so now we'll put out another record or whatever.
Right.
And at that point, that was a decision, yes. But like beforehand, no, it wasn't like all I thought about was the first release at first, and but I knew who I wanted to go to for the art, Kane Cox from Denver, and he's like one of the sickest dudes I know. He's awesome. So I like I wanted to just keep going back to him for the art. He's done the art for both of the EPs and the split as well.
Right.
Yeah, just because mostly just because I really fuck with him, you know.
Someone off screen. I was
Bye.
like, is the cat climbing up that high? I'm just like, oh shit, here we go.
She's right here.
Yeah.
She's been like all over the place, really distracting.
No, that's fine.
But yeah, fucking Kane Cox from Denver, Colorado, sick ass dude.
Yeah.
And you got a dog back there too.
Yeah. These two have just been like wanting to leave this room, but
maybe they know about the cat, you know, like they can sense it.
Oh, if Minnow knew for sure, and there was some kind of tech where she could jump through this, it would just be game over. But yeah, like I think that is something that, you know, some bands can get lost in, where they have like one release and maybe it takes a couple to find like this is what like this is the artwork that actually connects to our style. And you know, sometimes there's like different, you know, there's different ways that I've seen bands kind of connect the dots, where maybe there's like a consistent character that kind of carries over from release to release, or there's different like color themes that people are doing. But I think for your guys' musical style, you know, the simplicity of that, and just the little pieces that almost kind of create as like kind of a flashboard, if anything, really works. Has that been confusing at times when you're explaining, like, or people are talking to you? It's like, oh, I like the one with the gun. Oh, no, it's the scorpion. Or there's things that cover on both of those. So has that been confusing?
People don't usually talk about the specifics of it. I feel like they just say like, oh, I like the art, or like, oh, I thought that was cool, blah blah blah. Like, I don't usually, there's no like discussion of the specific elements, but yeah, I don't even know, like, did we come up with these elements or did he come up with them? I don't remember anymore.
Sure.
But yeah, clearly it worked and people liked it, and I always thought it was cool. I know people think it's like goofy or whatever, like tattoo flashy or whatever.
Nah, I think that if anything connects multiple worlds, that, you know, is clear. It is just so you know, tied to hardcore, you know, tattoo culture, like skateboarding, all those things are connected. And I feel like being able to play to those things in a natural and not like performative way is, you know, that totally makes sense to me.
Yeah, I feel that.
So, you know, aesthetically, we've talked a little bit about Spy. Sonically, I think something that really stands out to me is, and I think this has come up on a couple interviews you've done, but just like the healthy amount of guitar feedback that's on the songs. And if anything, I almost feel like, and this could be a Toshio thing, so if he's listening, shout out. I feel like the mix for the guitar feedback is almost like louder than everything else at times, like just those sections. And to give you a bit of context, there was a band that wasn't, they were a little bit more like heavy hardcore, but they would start multiple songs just with like almost a minute's worth of like harmonizing feedback to a degree. And that was like so influential to me, just to how feedback can kind of play within punk and hardcore music on the recording side. So why is, or how vital is guitar feedback when it comes to Spy?
It's very vital. I love it. It's like that's one thing I was adamant about from the start. Even just like writing the songs, I knew that I wanted tons of feedback because I've always loved when a band has that in recording and live too. Um, just ugly, gross feedback. Um, it sets the tone. It feels right. I don't
Right.
know. I love
Yeah.
that. That was very intentional, and it's become like a part of the sound and everything. And it's almost like its own instrument or something. I don't know. I love feedback. I'm a
Yeah.
huge fan of feedback. So
There's definitely been recording sessions for Endgame, which is the current band I play in, but also many other where it's like I know what the feedback wants to be, but it's like I have to stand in the room with the guitar for like what feels like half an hour, just like getting the right,
yeah,
okay, it needs to go higher here and then come down, like just like and then when you blend those between two guitar tracks, like that's where things can get
yeah.
real dangerous. So, um, when you were doing the recording of the guitars, like were you doing that just like no, just one more, like because sometimes for people that don't think of that feedback way, like I think there was one time where I told like yeah, like I want to do some guitar feedback here, and he just like kind of would stand in front and then send me something back. I was like no, like you don't understand, it needs to sound more crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, yeah, I think part of the why it's worked so well is because Toshio totally gets it. Um, he understands what I mean when I say I want feedback. And like I'll go in and like just stand, not even stand. I'm like shaking the guitar and shit for like 15 minutes
Right.
in front of the amp and making all sorts of sounds. And then from that like 10 or 15 minutes, he gets like he gets the pieces that work best and then kind of blends them all together and makes it work.
Yeah.
He's a feedback genius. That guy.
Feedback genius.
Yeah.
Add that to your resume, Toshio.
Yeah. So I feel like it's definitely great that he understood what was meant by that, and he totally gets it. And because yeah, I could imagine a scenario in which I'm like recording with somebody, and I'm like, all right, I need like lots of feedback, and they're like, what?
Yeah, but
Because I don't know, some people don't fuck with feedback, right? Some people think it's like, for all the reasons I described, they don't like it. It's gross. It's ugly. It
yeah,
sounds like
but I don't know. It's like
want like a clean product.
there's something to be said where if you strip away all the guitar pedals and you just have like you're just going direct into your amp, which is something that I think doing that process shows if you're like a hardcore kid or not. I think if you're like someone that is just obsessed with like, I gotta have my fucking backing tracks and I gotta have all this fancy shit, but you can't play a set just like direct into your cab and just play those parts that might be super crisp and clean and not have any feedback, but it almost feels cooler when it has feedback. Like just being able to I feel like any band, whether you're a metallic hardcore band, a punk hardcore band, a beatdown band, like you need to be able to play your set with like no bare bones and let the feedback be what it is. But yeah, it helps. It totally helps on the recording to help set up the veracity of what people are about to listen to for sure.
Yeah, I think it's a crucial element of the recordings.
Yeah. So you mentioned like yeah, like we're talking about the crazy aspect where it's like very raw, which I definitely hear that on the first two EPs. Like it feels like if anything a continuation of both of those things. The split to me is interesting because even though it still has that raw crazy aspect, to me the sonic side of those recordings feel a little bit more doctored up and like we're taking the knob to like of production and just turning it ever so slightly. Was that intentional, or is that just like we just got better as a band and there's other people who are recording now?
Nothing changed, honestly. Like, it's still Toshio recording. It's still like after the first EP, everybody started recording, all their parts and shit. That was just the first one was just me. Because it was like a product of that situation, I guess. But yeah, everybody's recording their parts, and it's still with Toshio. I don't know. I think every recording session's a little different, so that might be the explanatory factor or whatever. But it wasn't intentional. I wouldn't say. Like, there's still a lot of like really gnarly feedback on there, but maybe it's just like overall touch cleaner. But
Yeah.
I don't
Like,
know.
I
That's
still
it.
feel like the
Question.
yeah, I still feel like the vocals, as far as the, the crazy aspect of that is still there. I just feel like the lot, like, I just feel like sonically you guys are drawing more in the lines intentionally a little bit more. It doesn't, but you're still choosing, um what colors, or like how crazy you're pressing down on it.
Mm,
It, like, using that like coloring book analogy, but I
yeah.
just feel like, I don't know, just listening to everything front to back. As soon as I hit the split, I was like, oh, like things are just a little bit on the tighter side, but like it's still spy in the
Yeah.
spy like craziness level.
I think the songwriting process has changed too over time. From the the initial release is just stuff that I wrote, like, and we never do anything really other than power chords, with the exception of like some guitar leads, not actual leads, but just like a little bendy, whatever that thing.
Right.
Um, But yeah, we don't even like palm mute or anything ever. It's all just straight power chords with really like the most simple approach. But um, like, for example, Drew, who plays guitar for us, is like an amazing guitar player. So I feel like his influence is probably making the tracks stronger and more complex and better than anything I would have done,
Sure.
because I'm just like a moron, like do 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 do, like, whereas he's like, what if I did this shit, and I'm like, wow, that's really crazy cool.
Right.
All right. So I feel like that's probably part of it too, that like the songwriting process has changed. It's more collaborative. There's more ideas coming in from everybody.
Sure.
We're gonna put out a new record next year, and it's gonna be uh, the most collaborative or whatever of all of our material. So yeah, there's just different in not even different influences, but like different influences within the band that are shining through maybe now.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's part of what's going on.
Yeah.
Because it's not just me writing a song anymore. It's like me being like, here's a riff, here's a part, here's a skeleton. What do you think? And then it changes, and then it gets a lot of different ideas thrown into the mix, and we come out the other end with the end result, which has been touched by everybody in some way usually.
Yeah. So, we've talked a lot about like the initial establishing of the sound and how all those things look. When it became possible to, okay, now we're debuting this band in a live setting. At least when I saw you guys, it just like I felt like what I would hear on the live, like on recording, totally matched the energy and the like in your face nature that you guys bring on the live setting. Was it like partly like when that first guitar feedback rolls in, do you just like go like bull, like you only see red and you don't you black out for less
Yeah,
of it?
honestly, yeah, really, like, actually, yes, that does pretty much describe what happens. I don't like think about anything. I don't. Uh, yeah, my brain just kind of shuts off, and then this
Right.
set happens, and then it's over, and then I try to think back about what happened. I'm like, I don't really. It's all blur. I don't know. I think that's partially like anxiety fueled. It's like, oh wow, like you know, I have like tons of like stage anxiety or whatever, so I like never really remember a set
Hmm.
because I think I'm just like trying to mentally get through it, and then after that, it's like, wow, that was a blur. That was fun. Um, but yeah, brain definitely shuts off. But that was a intentional thing, always to have like the live show be the best part, the most energetic part, um, the sort of like accompanying. Uh, I don't know, the thing that goes with the recordings where you're like, okay, yeah, it matches, it makes sense.
Right.
And the recordings, I think, are meant to try to capture some of the live energy. Um, yeah, yeah, that's that's my answer.
Yeah. Well, when I saw you at Act Like like you're, you're just jumping on the floor like unprompted, like screaming in people's faces as people are moshing, jumping on people. Like it's it's so like necessary for bands, whatever style of hardcore that they play to just be like, how am I like winning these people over with this music? Because it's one thing to like create a fan, off of like a single or a release or a music video, but being able to like to connect with people or have connect with people in like a way where it's like either they're singing along or it's like I'm almost afraid of this, vocalist that's like just like going, just like it almost becomes like you need to become an over animated version of yourself when you're doing your music, because a lot of people will like see that and connect with it, or they'll just be like, oh, they'll respect it just off of the fact that it's so wild. So yeah, I think the live aspect of what you guys are doing is really just on point. And yeah, there is a point for a lot of vocalists where they're just like, I don't remember the 20 minutes that we just played, because it's just like, so whether it's a like an anxious thing or there's something else where it's just like just blind fury. I think that's very cool.
Thanks, thanks for fucking with what we're doing.
Of
I
course.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, yeah. I mean, the live thing is a performance, right? It's supposed to be a spectacle. It's supposed to be entertaining. It's supposed to be energetic, and it's like all the things I liked the most when watching bands when I was getting into all this stuff, and like even now today, like I've always enjoyed watching uh like a over the top, I guess, singer or front person or whatever, like a lot of energy and a
Right.
lot of intensity too. I like intensity in a live performance. So,
Right.
but yeah, I try to, I guess, emulate some of the stuff that I've always admired in other vocalists and
Yeah.
singers and front people, or even guitarists. Sometimes guitarists bring that energy.
Yeah. Has there
Or
ever been
bassists.
a show where you are just, again, like that blind fury, you're like, just kind of going through whatever, the crowd is going, and you're just kind of like going through the set, and either there's something, is there anything that like derails that like, A to B process of like getting through and just, doing your best? Or anything that like really takes the wind out of your sails? Is there anything that's like kind of fucks with your flow?
Uh, yeah, definitely. If the crowd is like not moving, or I'm not getting like stage dives or whatever, like that will really fuck me up. Internally, I try not to let it shine through externally, but yeah, I definitely like, and the opposite is true too, where like I will completely like feed off the energy of other people being into it.
Hmm.
And if like if the crowd's moving and there's people stage diving and someone wants to grab the mic or some shit, then that's what really like gets me even more energized and feeling uh really good about the set. But yeah, if the opposite is true and it's like a really awkward situation, then it's like, fuck, man, like
Yeah.
somebody please do something else, please.
Well,
But luckily, usually people are pretty into it, and we usually get a pretty decent response from people, which
mhm.
which I always enjoy and makes that's what makes the shows for me like actually the one thing that really makes me enjoy a show more than anything is the crowd energy if they're into it.
Right.
Um, like all my favorite shows, nothing else about the show will really matter so much as just the reception and the energy of the crowd. And if that's really good, then that's my favorite show. That's the best show of the tour or whatever. That
Yeah.
it's always going to be the ones with the most energy from people,
Yeah.
especially
Well,
stage dives. I love stage dives. All I want is like endless waves of stage dives. That's all.
you got the Scott Vogel mindset. You're like, yo, I need stage dives to
Yeah,
fucking.
straight up. That's my favorite part of hardcore is fucking stage dives. I everything else is cool too, but the stage dives are the sickest thing. Like
Yeah.
everybody, please come up here and jump off.
Yeah. Please
That's
more stage dives. My
yeah.
dog's about to stage dive off my chair. But no, I think that whole process of like, no matter what style of hardcore that you play, like there's a circulation of like being able to have a hype set from a band as well as a band that like you really don't want to be on my lap. Okay, get down. Jeez. Um, a band that's playing a hype set and a crowd that's like reacting, not in a way that's like, oh, it's all the homies. It's like it's the homies, it's the people that are seeing that band for the first time and they're like, holy shit, like I can feel all that energy and that like you can almost feel like it's like a cyclone in the room where it's like everything is like bouncing off of one another and it just is like, you know, the the intensity level is just building and building. And especially at Act Like You Know, there's a lot of bands who were just having those sets where it's just like things were just getting crazier and crazier. And it's like, we're like 10 bands in, and for some reason, people aren't burnt and spent when it comes to that. So I feel like that always carries over, especially in a fest setting. But I totally agree that the best sets, whether they're on tour or from a fest, is like when all the vibes are in check and everyone's like there to have a good time and go off for that band. However, it's like not appropriate to go off for that band, but like you look at a band like Turnstile, I feel like over the years people would watch those videos and they're like, "Oh, that's the way that I can react when I go to a Turnstile show." Or they watch a like a Code Orange video and there's like, "Oh, like this is how people go to that," and then they go to their own shows. So I'm sure that there's, people that are watching Spy live sets on the internet and, they hear the music and it's a double-edged sword of just being like, oh, like this is how I can react when I'm going to a Spy show and I can just, get as crazy as these people are getting crazy on stage.
Yeah. Yeah, please get as crazy as you like.
I got a little bit of a goof here, but it is kind of a serious question. The Instagram name or handle for Spy is Spy Worldwide, and obviously, like coming from having family in Poland, and obviously we were talking just before the episode as well about you originally being born in Canada and coming up through Vancouver a couple of times. Spy has done a lot in the States and, done a little bit of other things, but where are the top 3 places in the years to come that you hope Spy gets to play shows? Some could be super already in the works and attainable, and some could just be huge pipe dreams, but where are the 3 places that you want the Spy Worldwide realization?
So if you asked me this a year ago, I would have said number one, Poland. But we were able to play there over the summer when we went to Europe,
Mhm.
and that was like a lifelong dream achieved or whatever for me. So that was sick. But yes, at this point, I would say the top 3 places. Number one, I want to play in Indonesia because I feel like we get a lot of love out there. when Spotify tells you like the countries that people listen to you or whatever, number one is the U.S. of course, I guess, but then number two is Indonesia
Hmm.
over Canada, over the UK, over Germany, over everything else. So I definitely want to go play in Indonesia. I
A
don't
lot
know
of
how.
dope Indonesian hardcore bands.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, and everybody seems really nice and enthusiastic, at least on the internet, which is a positive sign. So,
Right.
yeah, I definitely want to play in Indonesia. I'd say number two, I want to play in Australia. Um, we just played with Primitive Blast, who's from Australia, over the weekend in LA, and they're really nice and they're a really good band. And I'd love to go out there and play some shows with them.
Yeah.
And third, I would say Japan, because Japan is sick. I've always loved watching U.S. bands playing in Japan videos
Hmm.
online, because it just looks like people are super into it, and looks like there's a devoted community that's super down.
Hmm.
Um, and I've been there before just as like a tourist, and it was fucking cool. So I'd like to go back there. And I've never been to Australia or Indonesia, so those would be like a personal travel thing too, which would be sick.
Yeah.
Um,
The
and
Spy
yeah,
Worldwide Tour, all those places are pretty close together if you're looking,
yeah,
a little bit on the map.
that could be a continuous tour, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. That would be really sick.
Yeah, yeah.
So hopefully we can do that in the
Yeah.
coming.
Also, all places that like I would agree. Any bands that I have seen that have gone out there that are either doing a short run or maybe it's like a couple shows around a festival, those are scenes that really grab the realization that that might be the only time that they're gonna see that band. Because you know we talk about it all the time that like bands aren't here forever. The lifespan of most bands is a few years, if that. So if a band does get an opportunity and gets to a scale where they can go to another country, those like I think those countries realize that. And, even people where they get the opportunity to see bands like Spy or any of their local bands, they're like, I'll just catch them at the next one. And then, for whatever reasons, bands, decide to hang it up or they feel like it's run its course and it's time to do new things. So, yeah, I think those scenes just have that realization where it's like, not as privileged and they just act on things a little bit more than North America for sure.
That's a good point. That's like the same reason why I feel like if you might hit some small town somewhere like in the Midwest on tour, you get like a crazy good show that you didn't expect.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and that totally makes sense. I mean, like somebody seeing Spy in New York, they're like, yeah, they'll be back in 2 months, like whatever. I don't even.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like we played New York City like 5 times in the last year,
Hmm.
which was sick and great. But yeah, there's certain areas that you're gonna hit way more on tour, and there's certain areas that you might go to once ever.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. And I would argue as someone that comes from another like underdog scene is like you have to convince these bands that it's like, yeah, like coming here it is a good time because their experience, they're going to go back to their scenes and talk to their, other homies like, yo, you have to go to Montreal, you have to go to Calgary, you need to go to Vancouver, you need to go to Winnipeg to play shows in Canada. Because, like those shows were even crazier than Toronto or whatever like mainstay to be expected good show is, because I totally agree that like especially in the Midwest there's tons of bands and people in the scene who are like really like we're really trying to focus in on like trying to make our scene awesome and giving bands the best time ever because maybe they're not playing in LA where they can just go off and do a million things. And the few there was a number of times where I was down in California um for work a lot last year, and there was times where it's like, oh, it is cool that like there's always something like music wise that's happening, but then it would almost be like, oh, there's two things for me to choose from, and that
Yeah,
feels very different than like there's the one event maybe once a month up here in Calgary, depending on the time of year. So yeah, I think it's very, don't skip the small stuff because the small stuff actually might be better than the big scale things for sure.
Yeah, and I think a few things you said are super relevant. Like one, like it is like a word of mouth thing too. Like if you play somewhere, like most of the time when I decide if I want to play somewhere, now I'm like, hey, like how's this place? I ask people, and they're like, yeah, it's great. And then I'm like, all right, well then we'll go play there too.
Right.
Or if they're like, oh, actually it was pretty bunk and like played to 20 people and nobody cared, and I'm like, maybe I'll skip that spot.
Right.
That totally is a way that how bands decide to tour. At least for me, it is.
Right.
Um, I want to hit the places that have like a good scene going, and that it would be a sick show. And if somebody tells me it's going to be a sick show, I'm all right. I'm in. That's all it takes. Then another thing, the the show fatigue, kind of the thing that happens when you live in a big city or like a area like the Bay Area where there's shows like 5 shows a week or even more or whatever, and then like you can't possibly hit them all, and then you just like you got to pick and choose versus like the one show a month that everybody's going to,
Right. Yeah,
that's
there's
totally
definitely people that are getting into this that like they're over the moon excited that there's 5 shows, Monday through
yeah.
Friday that they can go to. But, the people that have been in this shit for like 10 plus years, it's like, oh my God, that's like 10 evenings that I got to dedicate to the core. Like I
It's
got
almost like like it's you're so lucky and fortunate, and all that, but then it's like fuck, like I can't go to all these. Like I'm
right.
30 years old. Like I gotta go to bed. Whatever.
Yeah.
It's like it's almost like I'm stoked to see a show announced, but I'm like really hoping there's no show the next day or before announced as well.
You're like,
Like
please
hoping
have a
there's like
buffer zone. Yeah.
don't make me choose or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Well, going back to earlier in the convo, like talking about there is a point especially in the early days where it's like, oh, like this, it's kind of that like that I think it's like a TikTok where it's like, it's showing a bunch of albums and it's like, yep, this is gonna be my personality for the rest of my life or something like that. But yeah, there is an all encompassing aspect to it, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't come at a cost. And people are in different stages in their life. People have different work schedules where it's like they work evenings or they can't afford, not every hardcore kid just works 9 to 5 and has all the evenings and weekends free. But yeah, there is a balance where things, for a new kid, it's super exciting to be able to go to so much. And if anything, I feel like being that activity level should be encouraged to like to go to as many shows as you can. But that's easier said than done the older that you get.
yeah, 100%, 100%. Yeah. For the young kids out there, go to all the shows. That's the time to do it too. Like when I was just getting into everything, and every single show was like the most exciting thing in the world to me. So um, yeah, definitely I can relate with that experience of being a
Mm,
kid on
yeah.
shows.
Yeah, like I think the one of the very first bands I was playing in our first 3 shows was Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of the same week. And we played the same venue the Wednesday and Friday. And looking back at that, I'm like, there's no way that that would fly in this day and age because it's like, what? Like, I'm gonna like, we'll be back here in 2 days,
Yeah.
But yeah, even going back to the other point that we were talking about, just like the aspect of like, yeah, like people talk, people when bands are in a point like it's expensive to go on tour and to do these things. So like if you're trying to map things out and you're asking a friend like, hey, what's it like to play in Boise? They're and I think it's also dependent to ask like what's a most recent example of that, because if I'm going to use Boise as an example, like that scene has definitely scaled up a lot, gotten a little bit more attention over the years with bands like Witness Chamber or Ingrown or Rejection Pact. And I feel like someone playing in Boise in like 2018, yeah, maybe they had like a bunk show, but you know, if you asked any of the bands that played that within the last year, they'd be like, never skip Boise, you know? And so
Yeah,
like,
100%. Yeah,
yeah.
Boise's sick. We played there this year, and it was awesome. And yeah, Boise's great.
Yeah. So yeah,
Shout out.
I think that's I want to say that as an aspect of like, yes, like people talk, so it's like important to go to those shows, go as hard as fuck to rep where you're from, so those bands have a good experience and talk about that when they go home and they're planning out their next tours. But at the same time, I would almost encourage when people are mapping those places and they're unsure about, you know, a certain region or a certain city, try to find someone who's got a recent experience there versus
Yeah,
like I played there 5
100%.
years
Yeah,
ago, but like it was bunk. I feel like
yeah.
that's old
It changes.
information.
It changes so fast, especially like pre-COVID and post-COVID. It's
Yes.
not really post-COVID. People still get COVID, but you know, now that shows are back, scenes are way different. They're way livelier. They're bigger. There's more youth energy and shit. So all that is totally true. Like I wouldn't ask anybody about their experience in like 2019 because it's no longer relevant.
So
It
it's
doesn't.
so different. So different
Yeah,
now.
it changes really fast, and we're in like a different landscape at this point with shows. I feel like they're better than at any point in like the last 10 years
Totally agree.
before. Um, yeah, so yeah, definitely recent experiences are definitely the way to go because it's constantly in flux, even month to month. You know, you might have some kids that get into it for a second and they're like, it's not for me, and then they're
Mhm.
gone.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, it's definitely true.
Has there been a show or any scenes that you've played within the last year that like really caught you off guard as far as how immaculate the vibes were and just like people attending the show? Like, was there any that like really impressed you? And you didn't expect it to be that sick.
Yeah, mostly in the Midwest, honestly. Like, I've I had never even been to Kansas City or played a show or anything. And Kansas City was really sick on our U.S. tour that we did in April, I think.
Mm,
Um, Kansas City was amazing. I don't know what's considered the Midwest, so maybe I'll say a city and people will be like, "That's not the Midwest," but
right.
whatever. Kansas City, that was one of them. We played a really sick show in Cleveland, um, and that was awesome. Who else? Who's really got it going on?
Yeah, give me one more. Give me that hat trick's worth of
Denver, but I always expect it from Denver because they have like one of the sickest scenes. Like all the coolest hardcore bands are from Denver.
shit.
Not all of them, a lot of really sick bands from Denver. But that's expected. Hold up. Where do we play in between Kansas City and Cleveland? We played in Indiana, which was really cool, in Fort Wayne, the
Mhm.
house show. That was awesome. But basically, I feel like the areas that um, people always talk about the coasts, East Coast, West Coast, and those are always going to be great. But I feel like some of the fun places in the middle of the U.S. are really like the Midwest areas are really sick right now.
Yeah.
Great,
I think
great
some of
people.
the most dedicated and people that are most excited about this. Not to say that I haven't met those people on both sides of the coast, but there's just been so many people that come to mind as we're talking about it, like who are within the Midwest. Midwest being a very loose term as far as whether it's Kentucky or Michigan or Minneapolis. Like there's so many places there that have people running dope scenes, playing in dope bands. So yeah, I'm just hoping the whole like flyover state kind of mantra when it
Right.
comes to hardcore is a thing of the past now because it's so evident through videos and festivals and different things that it's like
Yeah.
to connect the coasts ultimately.
It's just not how it is, like those are some of the places where you meet the most enthusiastic people and play some of the sickest shows.
Right.
Um, so those are places that should never be skipped. Uh, Yeah, those are my thoughts.
Those,
We
those
also
are
we
my
also
thoughts.
played like with we toured with Ceremony, and we played in like Detroit and Minneapolis, and those were really cool too.
Mhm.
Chicago is like a given. I feel like always, of course, Chicago's great.
Yeah,
But some of the other cities that aren't necessarily always getting the love they deserve.
totally agree.
In the West. Um, yeah, so shout out to the Midwest and
Yes.
all that,
I
all
think
the middle areas.
at Act Like You Know, when Endgame was playing, sometimes I just say really ridiculous, like I love rhyming like call outs. So I think I said something because we had Ryan from Gates to Hell do a guest spot, and right before he came on, there's like a ring out part, and I think I said something like, "Yo, if you're from the Midwest, give me your best," and then like we just like went into it, and Tyler from Constraint was like, "Did you say Midwest, give me your best?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "You are such a nerd."
Give me your
But
best, Midwest.
yeah, yeah. So trying to get creative with it. One of the last things I wanted to ask you, Peter, and this is something that anytime, and we can hit on this as much or as low as you want to, but anytime I talk about Spy or you, everyone who knows you always makes a point to be like, did you know that Peter was the original vocalist of Rings of Saturn? And I think the first time I heard that, it was almost so obscure that I was like, there's no way. But then people were like, no, that's what it is. So again,
True.
if that's like,
It's true.
I wanted to leave that semi buried at the very least. But
I'll tell you. I'll tell you the story from my perspective
sure.
on being in that band. That's like my first ever band. Basically, I joined it when it was, it was just a guy playing guitar and a drummer. There was no name. There was no tracks. It was just like somebody I knew from middle school hit me up on the AIM, like the AOL Instant Messenger from way back in the day. I don't know if you
I
use that.
remember. I remember.
Yeah, somebody hit me up on AIM, was like, "Hey, dude, do you do metal vocals?" And I was like, yeah, sure, why not?" Because I was like, trying to, but it
Yeah.
wasn't good for anything.
Yeah.
I was just
You're like,
a
I'll do
kid.
anything just to play.
Yeah, I would
music.
do anything to be in a band, basically. So I was like, okay, yeah, sure. And he's like, okay, well, like my cousin's girlfriend's friend is trying to start a band. You should go try out for them. And I was like, okay. So I went to this dude's garage and I like was like, "Urgh," and then he was like, all right, dude, you're in. It was like really like humble beginnings. I was like a sophomore in high school, I think.
Right.
And I was like pretty desperate to be in any band of any sort, and that just happened to be the one that like fell into my lap. And so I think I did that until, so somehow it like blew up on online on the internet. We like wrote, or one dude wrote the tracks, and then I think I recorded the vocals when I was like 16.
Mm-hmm.
For like their like debut album, and fast forward like 2 years basically, and like somehow that shit blew up on the internet, and then I graduated high school, and then like immediately went on like a US tour, my like first ever tour, and it was cool. It was like my first exposure to being in a band and touring, and then then we got like a bigger tour offer, and it was like another like full US tour, and I was like, shit, dude, I'm supposed to go to college. Like my parents are gonna be pissed. So I I was like in my first week of college, and I was like talking to all my professors, like, hey, if I leave for a month, is that cool? And they were like, no, you can't do that. Like that's not at all.
Absolutely not.
And I was like, shit, this is bad. I should probably figure this out. So then I did the thing that my parents were very disappointed in me for, which was drop out of school to go on tour. So I dropped out of my university to go to school, or to go on tour.
Right.
And I did that tour. So I did 2 like full US tours, one in the summer after I finished high school, and the other in the fall. And after that second one, I was like, okay, I should probably stop doing this and like go to school.
Yeah.
So then I quit that band, and just went to school for the next 7 fucking years or whatever. And luckily they let me back in. I like reapplied and they let me back in. So I
Oh, the
started.
school did, not the band.
The school did, yeah,
Yeah.
sorry, not the band. And so after I quit that band in like January, right after I started school again, this time for real.
Yeah.
And the rest is more or less history. I didn't have any like real relationship with that band at all for like a decade. And then I think it was like the 10-year anniversary of the album we put out when I was like 16. Uh, and and then I did like a little music video with them or something to celebrate the anniversary of their like
Gotcha.
first record. But yeah, that was like my first band, my first exposure to touring. Like I said before, I got into all this shit through the MySpace era. I was into like all the deathcore shit.
Right.
Like some of my favorite bands when I was a kid were like Suicide Silence and like Whitechapel and Job for a Cowboy. Like when I was like
Totally.
4, and like that was like that shit was massive at the time, and I loved it.
Right.
Yeah, that was my first band.
Yeah.
That's
So
true story.
true story of, factual shit here on the Scoped Exposure podcast. But I think the thing that's maybe the reason that people bring that up, or that's so interesting, is that if you look at the entire like tree of music, there's the branches of heavy music that are way like Spy and Rings of Saturn are far away, but if you zoom out and you look at everything, they're way closer together than trying to connect the dots between Spy and R&B or anything like
Yeah,
that.
for sure.
But even if you're just zooming in on just heavy music, those feel like polar opposites as far
Absolutely,
as
no, I feel it. I
yeah,
feel it.
like we were
It's
talking about
very
like the simplistic punk music, and I think I just just to make sure that I could like confidently talk about it, it's like this is the most mathiest, like the maximalist approach when it comes to like writing obscure heavy metal music. So it's just so funny, but again, like when you're that young, you're just like, I will literally do anything to play music. So it's like it doesn't
yeah.
really matter how things play out in the future. I just want to do it right now. But looking back, it's something that is still formative to you as far as like being able to go on tour and get your feet wet a little bit before getting into this. So
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of like laid the foundation of like, oh, touring is cool and I like it,
mhm.
and I want to get back to that at some point. Um, and it was like a really cool thing to do at such a young age, being like 18, like just out of school. I was like I didn't know anything, and I was like going across the country, and it was like it's like a fun, formative experience, um, and yeah, like as far as the sonic differences, I feel like Spy is me like writing music that I want to make, and that was like me like doing vocals to something that somebody else created, where it was
Sure.
like this is like I had no like input on the songwriting whatsoever, so it was all just um like making the vocals fit the music and all
Right.
that.
Yeah.
But I was into that style of stuff at the time for sure. Like especially like the more death metal side. I was like really into like all the old school death metal bands like when I was like 16, 17, 18 years old. So I was like trying to kind of emulate those vocal styles, like the low death metal stuff.
Right.
Like suffocation or something like that or whatever.
Right. So this very funny little I guess history nugget when it comes to you, is that something that gets brought up? How often does that get brought up while Spy's on tour? Is that only when you're playing with like homies that know that, or are there like random people that like have extensive lore on that band who are like, hey, I know where you came from, and you're like, I'm
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Ohio of all places.
It's I'd say it's usually just my friends or people I know that are like haha or because it's like a pretty ridiculous and absurd backstory,
Sure.
especially
Yeah.
now at this point. Um, but every now and again, I'll get some like kid that'll be like, hey, is it true? Or something like that. Or like, or they'll just say the name of the band. And I'm like, fuck, man. Like, I didn't expect that to happen
Right.
right now. It used to happen a lot, like when I was really young, like 18, 19. Because I would like go to a show or something and then someone would be like, hey, weren't you in that band? But like years passed and it was like, it kind of became ancient history.
Mhm.
But now I feel like it's resurfaced again at this point. I mean, it's been like, at this point, uh, over 11 years since I was even in that band.
Right.
Like that's a long time. And I was like 18. So I've gone through like my entire like 20s basically
Which is
not
arguably like a
like the
huge
most
like
formative, like
yes.
whatever, all that shit. Um like not being in that band. It's weird to like hear about something that you did when you were literally in high school, when you were a kid, like when you're about to turn 30. And it's like completely irrelevant to my life at this point, but it was like a big deal at the time. So
Right.
uh it still gets like brought up and shit, you know.
Right. Yeah, that is a
Which I
very
don't mind at all, you know. Bring it up, it's cool. It's a funny backstory for sure.
yeah, it is
It
very
gives you to have something that like you did literally when you were a teenager in high school. That's like usually your bands from that era don't follow you like
right. They stay dead and buried.
into your 30s, you know, like
Right.
they're obscure and nobody remembers them.
Right.
And like, but this one is the opposite of that. It's like prominent, or it was prominent, or maybe still is
Yeah.
prominent.
It's very rare for a band to continue on and do things cuz most of the times, like raise your hand if you like if the bands that you were playing in from 17 to your early 20s like maybe did a CD or whatever or was like a
Right.
band camp only and it's just like
Yeah.
sitting in your room like that's me. But yeah, it is a very unique experience for people that like were in something that again was just the option for them to get involved in music, but it kind of like carries with it. And you know it's I think it's cool that you're down to talk about it and like it becomes this kind of funny thing to be able to do it. But I don't know, I feel like there's probably a number of people within your friend group that are like it's like their life's mission to like educate as many people. I'm like, hey, just so
There's
you know.
there's definitely those people that I see like once every year or something, and they'll like bring it up, and I'm like, God, I fucking knew you were gonna talk about this. Yeah.
um so the last question I want to ask on this subject, if it was required for Rings of Saturn and Spy to be on the same bill, who would be the two, three, four other bands to make that mixed bill show actually work, in your opinion?
I honestly don't think there's a way to make it work. I think, like you said, the branches of the tree are too far apart. I
Yeah,
feel like you'd have to like put like 20 bands on there to sort of bridge the gap somehow. You'd have
it would
to
need to be a full fest.
it would have to be Spy, but like trending more metal with each band, and then them, but trending more like stripped down,
Yeah, more dummy.
and and then eventually maybe you'd meet at something that was like a like punky kind of death metal, but like then you get rid of all the tech parts and shit. So like it's like kind of impossible. I feel like
Right.
there's no way to do it.
Yeah, it
It'd
would
be
need
like
to be a full week's worth of music.
yeah, uh, it would be a really tall order, tall task. I don't know what the
Right.
you know what I'm trying to
Well,
say about.
if anyone is down and you want to write out who are the bands that connect those dots,
Yeah,
as long as you want to make it.
if somebody wants to do that, they can do that. But I don't think I could even begin to try.
Right. And I'm not going to sit here and try myself because it is a tall order for sure. But if people have done crazier things when it comes to talking about shit on this podcast. So if you want to write that list out and send it to me, I'll forward it to Peter and get his 2 cents on it.
Yeah, yeah. Let me know.
Yeah. I'm very curious on I would almost think I do agree that it would probably take more bands that I'm thinking of, like, this one little mixed bill show. But I would be impressed if people could write out ways to be like, oh, okay, I could understand how we can connect from, each band, and it gets like, you know, closer and closer. So
There's a way to do it. There's probably a way to do it.
when there's a will, there's a way, for sure.
But it won't be me writing it out.
It won't be either of us. Well, Peter, this has been like honestly like a super fun chat. You know, way like just like super easy to talk to you, and you know, I kind of felt that when we originally met for the first time, and that's what prompted the idea. And you know, this has been I learned a lot. I'm glad to have met another fellow honorary Canadian. I would consider Spy a Canadian band by proxy now. So definitely, you know, a lot of dope things there. And I hope that you guys can do a proper Western Canada debut one of these days. The last question I ask every guest who comes on the show is a favorite Mosh related story that they want to end on. And that is anything that is first to your mind, wholesome, gruesome, happened to you, you just saw it happen. Whatever's the first thing to your head is how we start to end towards the close.
All right, I'm gonna go with something for my youth, which also kind of ties into where I'm at today. We got to tour with Municipal Waste a little bit this year.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe 6 shows on the West Coast. And that's a band that I was a huge fan of when I was a kid, like a teenager. And so I have a specific memory of being like maybe 16 years old and at a Municipal Waste show and going for a stage dive. But as I was jumping off, I think I got pushed by I don't know, maybe like somebody who was like side stage or something, like pushed me off as I was jumping. So I flew over the entire like front of the crowd where I was trying to land, and I just landed like straight on the floor in the pit, like on my back.
Oh my God.
So
they pushed you almost as like a boost.
Yeah, I got
unnecessary boost. I see.
Yeah, I got, but I overshot everything, and I was like probably like a really like small, like 140-pound kid or something. So I guess maybe that's not small to me compared to now, but I was a skinny little kid and I just flew over everything and I landed on my back. It knocked the wind out of me and I couldn't breathe for like 10 minutes. I had to like be like escorted outside, and I was like outside, like wheezing, like, oh.
Right. Oh my God.
And yeah, I think that's a funny one, because that's probably the most like fucked up I've ever felt, like from like a show injury, honestly, 'cause I couldn't fucking get air into my lungs at
right.
all. And then I got to get way older and go on tour with them, and it was fucking sick.
Right. No.
Yeah.
That's very nice. Full circle. Did you mention that story to them, or did
I don't remember? I might have. I can't remember. But yeah, nowadays when I jump off, nobody pushes me, and even if they did, I probably wouldn't go that far.
Yeah. And if anything, the lesson learned in this story is if you see someone stage diving, there's no unnecessary boost that's needed, unless someone's
we don't need that.
You know, no. Can you give me a leg up or something? But like, don't mess with the execution of the dive.
Yeah. That's my full circle story.
Love that. Love that we're ending on a full circle moment. Again, Peter, all the links to your bands and your socials and all that good stuff will be in the show notes and in the description. If there's anyone you want to shout out, anything you want to plug, or anything you want to send the people off with before we go, the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on here. I had a good time chatting with you. I feel like I'm not very good at these sorts of things, but I feel like having video helps a lot.
Sure.
So next time I try to do a podcast or some shit, I'm going to insist that we do a video.
Just sorry to cut you off. I think it's strange. Like, I understand if someone wants to do an audio only, but to do it where you're not looking at someone, that seems strange to me. But anyways,
I think that might have been the missing link for me, because I feel like I've always had a hard time with just the audio podcast thing, but doing a video version feels a lot easier.
Right.
Besides that, though, I just, the only thing I'd have to say is thank you to anybody who's supported Spy in the last few years, or any of the bands that I've been doing World Peace as well. I like we couldn't do any of this without the support of other people. So we really appreciate everything that everybody's done for us, whether it's booked a show for us or come out to a show, bought a shirt, shared us online or with their friends or whatever. Any format of support is greatly appreciated. And that's about it. That's all I got.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, it's again, really great to chat with you. Everyone listening, go listen to Spy, go listen to World Peace. Be on the lookout for some new Spy music in the new year. And Peter, hope that we can do some Canadian shit as two Canadian dudes in the near future. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hope we can hit a hockey game or something.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.